Hi, thank you so much for joining this medical cannabis broadcast. Um, my goal is to try to make this a place where people can come and learn about medical cannabis, dispel the myths, and as well as all the different stereotypes and fears that have been placed into us by government and a lot of the propaganda that's been out there. So I want to really start by giving you a little bit of an overview and background about myself. So I've been in the cannabis space for about 26 years, all through different variations of that, starting as an activist, president of the Cannabis Action Network, as an operator of retail dispensaries, understanding the cultivation process of the plant, and all the way through to the treatment of patients with cannabis. And that's really what my passion is. So as I started working and focusing on my passion, which is treatment of patients with cannabis, one of the things that I started looking at was how does cannabis really work? And my background led me to an understanding of an experience that I've had. So I was treating a patient with multiple sclerosis. And in treating that patient with multiple sclerosis, we found a certain strain of cannabis that actually worked for that patient in alleviating their symptoms. So when I allow that or recommend that a person goes to a dispensary and pick up that specific strain, the person called me and said, "Hey, it's not really working for me." So that baffled me for a while, and I was trying to figure out why it's not working. So one of the main reasons why it wasn't working for him, the strain that we figured was working was not the same strain they picked up, even though it was called the same thing. So I started doing some research and came across a video from a gentleman named Kevin McKernan, who was the first person to genetically sequence cannabis in 2011. And in meeting Kevin and working closely with their company called Medicinal Genomics in Boston, I learned all about the genetics of the actual plant. And in doing so, I started really understanding what the plant is made of. So just to give a really brief overview, cannabis has cannabinoids and also terpenes. So if you think about an XY axis, cannabinoids are really the genetic profile of that plant. It's a genetics. And terpenes are what's expressed in that plant. So I'll get to that in a little bit more detail as I go along with this broadcast, but just to bear those two things in mind. So in understanding how the plant works, now it was time for me to understand how the body works and why does cannabis work in the body. So working with physicians, working with scientists, and really understanding, learning the endocannabinoid system, that sort of got me my initial introduction to the endocannabinoid system. So I had an experience. I was talking at an event for cannabis, where the host of the event was reading an 8,000-year-old Sanskrit text. And one of the things they were talking about was that bodies, and we're probably correct, it's in our bodies, but they were talking about more of a spiritual sense. However, they weren't far off. We are all born with an endocannabinoid system. So we are born with the system and the receptors for this incredible medicine. And this medicine's there for us for that reason. So if you think about it, our bodies, our brains, our bodies have what's called endocannabinoid receptors. They're found throughout the body. There are two different types of receptors. There are CB1 receptors. And if you think about CB1, think about your brain. So those receptors are in your brain. Then there's other receptors, which are CB2 receptors, they're in your body. So the combination of those, the different cannabinoids, which are the compounds in the cannabis plant, they help to open up those receptors and allow the production of different types of effects, medicinal effects. So they could be as I equate this to an on-off switch and a light switch. So some receptors have to be turned on, some receptors have to be turned off. So some of them you want to reduce inflammation, reduce anxiety, and someone may induce a feeling of some sorts. So in understanding how that works, there are various numbers of human genetics that go into effect of what cannabis and how cannabis really works within your body. So if you think about, as I explained, cannabis has cannabinoids and terpenes. So I'm going to talk about a few different cannabinoids, and some of them you may have heard on TV or done your research, because cannabis is a huge industry right now. It's got a lot of buzz. There are 28 states that are legal in either medicinal or recreational. So this is a huge, huge business, but it's still a medicine. So the way the cannabis works is, I explained, there's these cannabinoids. So the ones that you may have heard are THC and CBD. So THC is prevalent in the plant, and that's the part of the plant that gives you this psychoactive effect. CBD is also very prevalent in the plant, and a lot of research has been done recently to emphasize the positive medicinal effect of CBD. So that is a cannabinoid that does not have a psychoactive effect. It's associated with anti-inflammation, and it has an analgesic effect. So for certain types of conditions, that is a really good cannabinoid. Now, there is medicine out there that's created by the pharmaceutical industries, and those medicines synthesize cannabis. And when they synthesize cannabis, they isolate that specific compound. So not to get very deep into the science of it on this broadcast, but if you really think about taking just THC, isolating that, or just taking CBD and isolating that and using that as a medicine, partially effective. So when I say it's partially effective, remember, there are receptors, both your CB1 and CB2 receptors. In addition, as I mentioned before, there is these things called terpenes. So just to paint a visual picture of this, the genetics, just like human genetics, you have genetics of the plant, which include those cannabinoids. So THC, which gives you a psychoactive effect, CBD, which doesn't. The terpenes are expressed in the plant. So what I mean by that is, and originally it's thought that these expressions were created by the plant as natural insect repellent. So what I mean by that is, if anybody has ever smelled cannabis, each different plant has a different smell and taste. Those are the terpenes that are produced in that plant, and it matters on how you cultivate that. So nature, which is the genetics, versus nurture, which is how you cultivate that and what is expressed from that plant. So the combination of those cannabinoids and terpenes are the ones that give you the effect and can reduce pain, anxiety, all those other things that give you the medicinal effect that you're looking for in your body. So if you isolate one of the compounds, you're partially creating a benefit for yourself, but you're losing a tremendous amount of benefits that can happen from the plant. So in learning all this, one of the things that we started working on is trying to figure out how to start matching the human genes to the cannabis genes and start working on different types of compounds. Now, cannabis comes in all different types of ways that you can ingest that into your body. So you have, it's grown as a plant, so you can smoke it, you can vaporize it, which is heated to a certain temperature. And now they have all different types of formulations, which is you can eat it as an edible. You can use it as a sublingual, which is like a pipette that you put in your mouth or mix into your food. So there's all different types of ways to ingest that, which is important to know because different people have a different effect based on what type of formulation, how you ingest that in your body. So having an understanding that, just to recap, medicine, the effects of the cannabinoids with terpenes are the ones that give you that relief or that treatment of your condition. And it can be as simple as, hey, there's some pain and inflammation, all the way through a patient that's suffering from a major disease like cancer or some sort of genetic disorder. And there's a tremendous amount of studies showing that cannabis is absolutely 100% a great alternative. So, as I mentioned, started working with a group of doctors in Earth Healthcare, and our goal is to try to work on an integrated medical approach to treatment of different conditions. And what we do is we start with genetics. So understanding a human's genetics is the first step to anything, because this is an individual process of how it affects you. So when you're doing the genetic sequence of yourself and understanding that you may have some sort of variance, which is really a mutation in a gene, understanding that and the degree of that will also contribute to what type of cannabis treatment is right for you. An example of that would be, let's say there's a gene in your body. There's a gene called COMT. So that gene is associated specifically with dopamine and serotonin production. So if you have a variance in that gene or a mutation of that gene, you may have depression, or you may feel slightly fatigued, all the way through, depending on how much that variance is, all the way through to having bipolar disorder or something of that nature that's a lot more serious. So a basic understanding of a cannabis strain or a combination of those compounds that produce an effect that makes you sleepy, which is an addition of something called myrcene, which is a terpene in cannabis that actually is associated with sleep. You would want to avoid anything that is sort of a down, and promote strains and promote compounds that are more of an up. So a terpene that's associated with a feeling of production of serotonin and dopamine is called alpha limonene, for instance. So when you are medicating with cannabis that includes alpha limonene, you'll probably get a more of a lift. So there's these types of effects that you have to take into consideration. So when I'm talking about matching those genetics to your to the cannabis genetics, I'm also talking about lifestyle. So think of it this way: we talk about THC. THC gives you the psychoactive effect. CBD, and there's other different compounds, CBG, CBN, and everything else, not to get too deep into that now, but there's different types of cannabinoids. All of those have an effect on your body, where you also have to know how to ingest that into your body. So let's say that your lifestyle is associated with waking up, going to work, but you're waking up with pain. So you know that you have pain in your body. However, you have to operate a vehicle, you have to function during the day. So you understand that taking something that has THC, which has psychoactive properties, will probably affect you in a way that you may not want to in that day. So you come up with a solution, or we come up with a solution together that takes your lifestyle into consideration. What I mean by that is maybe a formulation that's CBD, which is cannabidiol with different terpenes that allow you to function during the day, but also turn on the receptors that bind to inflammation. So you use something called, for instance, beta-caryophyllene. So what that does, it's natural analgesic. It reduces the inflammation during the day. So you would be able to get relief during the day without having a psychoactive effect. And then maybe in the evening time, you take something that has a little bit more THC or some THC with a little bit of a different terpene profile that also help to alleviate the pain at night and also assist you with rest and relaxation and sleep. So those are the different things that we can do in terms of creating formulations that are specific to your needs. Genetics of the plant, as I said, play a huge role in treatment of different conditions. There are different studies, and what I want to get to at some point in these broadcasts is start focusing specifically on different types of conditions and start explaining how these conditions are affected positively with cannabis. The thing that really motivates me, that I wake up every day and grateful for, is the patient stories. When you have patients that have tried all kinds of different solutions and they tried opioids, etc., and they still haven't had the relief they're looking for, and they get on cannabis and you get a call or you get a text or you get an email saying, thank you, I can finally sleep, I can finally I'm pain free. That's motivation. This plant is more than what what you think marijuana. We're at the earliest stages. It's still a Schedule 1 narcotic, which means that it supposedly, according to the DEA, it is a Schedule 1, which is the same as heroin and crack and some of the other compounds, which actually says they have no medicinal value whatsoever. However, the federal government owns a patent on medicinal cannabis, as well as cultivate medicinal cannabis in Mississippi for research reasons. So it's interesting how that works because of all the propaganda that we've heard over the years. However, the stories that I hear from all over the world about physicians, scientists treating people with cannabis is truly inspirational. As I said, that is my passion. That is the goal of Earth Healthcare. And I truly feel that when we start doing our research and get a little bit deeper into clinical trials, we will see a lot more of these compounds coming in as true medicine. The thing to remember is that cannabis itself is a medicine that comes in all different types of forms that are appropriate for you. However, getting the knowledge to understand that one certain type of cannabis may not work for you, or you may have had an experience that wasn't really positive, does not mean that it's not going to be an effective treatment for you in the future. You can start with something very, very low CBD, which will show you that there is an effect, and then start titrating up. The great opportunity that we have at Earth Healthcare is that we're a medical facility that actually sees patients and does follow-ups with those patients. So we know that we promote, we have a cannabis solution for them. However, we can see them on an ongoing basis, as doctors can, and then we can titrate and reformulate according to feedback of the patients. So the difference is we're giving medicine back to you. You as the patient, you as the consumer, you're in control of your own medication. You're in control of your own lifestyle. And that's the goal. The goal is to get that out of the hands of the pharmaceutical industries and start focusing on a way to be able to contribute in a positive way where you take control of your own treatment plan. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on was opioids as well. So what happens with opioids, by the way, there's a genetic mutation that make you more susceptible to opioid addiction. The way opioids work, they're really similar to the way cannabinoids work. So they have receptors, they bind to those receptors, and they block those receptors. So they block a feeling. So as an example would be, if you prick your finger or if you feel a certain pain, there's a neurotransmitter that goes up and it makes a signal to your brain tells you pain. What an opioid does, it blocks the receptor. So remember the on-off switch? This is an off switch. So it blocks the receptor. So the goal is to not make you feel the pain. However, it doesn't do anything to treat the underlying condition that's causing that pain. And that is the difference. So a couple different things. When you're using cannabis as medicine, the goal of integrated medicine is to be able to go in and treat the underlying condition that's causing the symptom. So it's not just treating the pain that you have, it's actually focusing on the reduction of what is causing the root cause of that pain versus opioids. Now, if you recall, I just mentioned that opioids bind to those receptors. So if somebody's on opioids, it's very, very difficult for the cannabinoids to be able to bypass those receptors and open those back up. Cannabinoids block them. So this is a transitional process of being able to start using cannabis as an alternative treatment to opioids, especially if you have a genetic mutation that makes you more susceptible to opioid addiction. There have not been any deaths that are associated with cannabis, but there's been thousands and thousands and thousands that are associated with opioids. So if that's not reason enough to consider that, then I'm not sure exactly what is. So going back to saying that looking at your genetics and associating them with the cannabis genetics is a solution that you might want to consider. In addition to that, I also want to talk about different types of conditions and how those conditions may work with cannabis. So if we talk about pain, so I'll mention this way. So the top conditions that people try cannabis for have been sleep, focus, depression, anxiety, and also pain. So each one of those conditions is associated with different types of formulation. So a formulation that may be associated with the treatment of pain can include CBD with maybe a small amount of THC that will open up your CB2 receptors. So you want that in your body. And then once those receptors are opened up, you would want something like a beta-caryophyllene, which is a terpene that is an analgesic, anti-inflammatory. So the pain reduction is not just to feel the pain starting to get relieved. It is also to reduce that inflammation that's causing the actual pain. And that's the goal. For something like sleep, it depends. It depends what's causing sleep. So I'm not promoting cannabis alone, just as a cure-all solution. You have to look at and work with a physician and determine what's causing that. However, there are also ways to be able to determine what's causing that genetically. And if that's the case, and we find there's a genetic mutation, then we know that a combination of CBD, CBG, and CBN with something called myrcene will actually promote drowsiness in a positive way instead of taking drugs into your system. So all those are possible solutions, as well as focus. So one of the things, I guess I didn't go into my story too long, but when I was about 15 or so, I was diagnosed with ADD. The H wasn't there at the time of my diagnosis. So I always thought that I had a hard time focusing. And my hard time focusing had to do with ADD. And basically, it's a lack of production of dopamine. And we all have a natural filtration system to cut out outside noise and distractions. Somebody with ADD does not have that luxury. So there's always something else that's stimulating you, that you're always going, that squirrel moment squirrel, you're always going into the next thing because you're also getting that stimulation from another outside source. So you're always looking for that dopamine production. So they put me on, some sort of pharmaceutical medicine. I don't even recall what that was. and I tried it out for a week or so. And after that time, I realized that I just became numb. So what that did was it took away any emotion that I felt. It probably helped me with focus, but it didn't allow me to be me. It altered my entire state. So finding cannabis and finding a way to be able to use cannabis to help focus in microdosing, that actually changed my entire life. Um, Not advocating that for anybody who's under 21 in any way. There are CBD treatments that are not psychoactive for kids with epilepsy and other autism and other conditions. Do take that in a very effective way. So see a physician, see somebody who's an expert in the field. However, my personal story is that it actually worked and it helped me tremendously throughout my life. So my goal was to try to understand why. And why is because of, as I mentioned before, there are compounds in that entourage of the cannabis plant that actually promote the production of serotonin, dopamine. Those are the things that I really need in order for me to start getting stimulated and focused. So there's other people like that out in the world that I'm sure can use that type of compound. As I mentioned before, legalities. So I just want to kind of touch on briefly, and I'm in California, so I want to just speaking about the legalities. You have to look within your state. In the state of California, we voted on Proposition 64, which is an Adult Use Care Act, which basically allows adults over the age of 21 with a driver's license to go into a dispensary and purchase cannabis. Prior to you doing that, I really urge everyone to be educated on what they're putting into their bodies. There's a couple different things. Number one, understanding your own condition and understanding what, not just an indica and sativa, which are different types of cannabis strains, but also the overall compound that works with you. So learn that first. Number two, get an understanding of how you like to ingest cannabis. So, for example, edibles. So when you eat, chocolate that's infused with cannabis, what happens is it travels to your liver. Your liver does a conversion. It secretes that compound to something called 11-oxyhydroxy delta 9 tetracannabinol, or 11-OH. Pretty long, complicated word. So 11-OH is 3 to 5 times more potent than THC. So I had a conversation with somebody that I know the other day, and I asked if they try cannabis. And I said, oh, man, I had tried it years ago. I ate a brownie, and I was high and sick for days. And okay, that's understandable. Maybe that person's genetics and that person's liver converted it to a 5 times more potent effect, and they had a bad experience. Don't let that bad experience deter you from this medicine. CBD doesn't have a psychoactive effect. Remember that. I believe my time is coming to an end. I will address questions. I really, really thank every single person here who joined. I will please leave me some feedback. I'd love to learn how to improve. I want to provide as much information as I possibly can on cannabis as medicine. Feel free to continue your questions, and I will reschedule another broadcast shortly and start going into a little bit deeper on the different conditions that are associated with cannabis as medicine. Thank you so much. Take care.